I truly never expected that after all the years of struggle, after finally winning his heart, he would lose his memory. Exhaustion and helplessness crashed over me. My nails dug deep into my palms as I stared at Steven's pale, distant face and forced myself to stay calm. You forgot? Steven looked up at me. His expression didn't change. Only the faintest trace of guilt flickered in his eyes. Yeah, it was almost laughable. I'd secretly loved him since childhood, swallowing those feelings for years. 3 years ago, I confessed while drunk. After that, I stopped holding back my pride. I chased him over and over again, or maybe begged was the better word. Rejected again and again. My heart had already reached its limit. Just when I was finally ready to give up, he turned around and chose me. And now, of all times, his memory had returned to the point right after my drunken confession, before we ever started dating. Believe it or not, we've been together for quite a while. I pulled out my phone, trying to find proof of our relationship, but as I scrolled through our messages, tears finally slipped down my face. It turned out that even after we got together, nothing between us had really changed. I was still the one constantly compromising and trying to please him. He was still indifferent, going through the motions, never truly caring. It felt as if a hand squeezed my heart tight before suddenly letting go. Air rushed back into my lungs, easing the suffocating ache. In the end, I wiped away my tears with the back of my hand and looked up at him. Steven lowered his long lashes. It was impossible to tell what he was feeling. So that's how it is? His voice was so quiet it was almost impossible to hear. After holding it in for so long, I suddenly stood up. I lied to you. Sorry. Chapter 1. I gave up. Forgetting him and refusing to walk down that same old road again seemed like the better choice. After all, life doesn't give you that many 3-year stretches. Youth doesn't. Love certainly doesn't. A complicated expression briefly crossed Steven's breathtakingly handsome face. His lips pressed tightly together, but he said nothing. It wasn't the reaction I'd expected. For a moment, I felt dazed. I opened my mouth, wanting to say something else, but no sound came out. Steven saved me from the awkward silence. His usual cool, reserved expression returned as he changed the subject. Sit down. Why are you standing? I shook my head and picked up my bag. If you don't want your parents worrying, then I won't tell them. I've already arranged a caregiver for you. I'll come visit when I have time. Steven responded with a quiet hum. His narrow eyes swept over me with detached indifference. Thanks. I said nothing. I turned around, closed the door behind me, and left in a hurry. Maybe letting go of someone wasn't as difficult as I thought. Maybe every setback I'd suffered before had been another step toward giving up. And today was simply where that road ended. I was exhausted. So exhausted that my legs felt weak. Leaning against the hospital wall, I slowly crouched down, pressing a hand against my hollow chest as I fought back the burning sensation in my eyes. I couldn't even describe what I was feeling. Steven had hesitated. I knew that if I stayed, we could probably end up together again. But who could accept that? Nothing hurts more than getting something you've longed for, only to lose it all over again. I'd rather spend 6 years chasing him than spend 3 years finally getting my happy ending, only to discover I'd been thrown right back to the starting line. I kept telling myself I wasn't upset. Then I rear-ended someone on the drive home. Looking at the 2 cars sitting several yards apart after the collision, I suddenly found the whole thing absurdly funny. Miss, you just hit my brand new Lamborghini. Why are you smiling? The owner of the car stepped out and leaned against my hood, looking utterly confused. I looked up at the clean-cut young man standing in front of me. His face was bright, handsome, and full of youthful energy. Just like that, all the gloom weighing on me disappeared. Maybe that was the magic of youth. I'm sorry. Give me your contact information. I'll take full responsibility. I pulled out my phone and waited for his number. He looked me up and down before pursing his lips. You're way too pretty for that kind of hustle. Then he turned around and got back into his car without another word. I stood there in shock as he drove away. Only after replaying the conversation several times did I realize what he'd meant. He thought I was one of those gorgeous girls renting luxury cars to attract wealthy men. Did young people really have imaginations this wild nowadays? I climbed back into my car, laughing despite myself. Even after driving for miles, the encounter still felt oddly amusing. When I arrived at the dealership and headed to the waiting lounge for my ride home, I discovered the same guy was lying on a sofa fast asleep. What a coincidence. I walked over and nudged him. He woke up groggily, blinking at me. What are you doing here? Getting my car repaired. And no, I wasn't running some scam. Young people really need to stop jumping to conclusions. What's your name? Put the repair bill on my tab. Isaac. I nodded and turned to find an employee. Before I could leave, Isaac grabbed my wrist. No need. He pulled out his phone, lowered his gaze, and brought up a QR code. Pretty lady, scan me. I should have refused, but seeing his reddened ears, soft hair, long eyelashes, and the lingering baby fat in his cheeks, my heart softened. I took out my phone and added him. So your name is Rebecca. Isaac raised an eyebrow and flashed a grin, revealing 2 small canine teeth. Nice name. He actually looked rather cool at first glance. Long eyes, hooded lids, slightly upturned corners, a sharp nose, a perfectly defined jawline. Yet somehow he still carried that irresistible puppy boy charm. The moment his eyes fully opened and he smiled, all that coolness melted away. Before I knew it, the words slipped out. If you're not letting me pay for the repairs, then let me buy you dinner sometime. Isaac immediately raised an eyebrow. There was a hint of arrogance in his expression. Tonight. I couldn't help it. I burst out laughing. Deal. Maybe I laughed a little too hard. The 6-foot-something young man in front of me reddened all the way to his ears, clenched his jaw, and somehow managed to look both adorable and intimidating at the same time. Chapter 2. After someone brought my McLaren around, I took Isaac out for dinner. The moment he got into the passenger seat, he rested one arm on the window and flashed me a crooked grin. There was something mischievous about it. This is actually my first time riding shotgun in a woman's car. The way you say that. You've had plenty of girls riding in yours. I glanced at him with a smile. Then again, it wasn't surprising. He was ridiculously good-looking. His face rarely gave away his emotions, but his ears did. The second he got teased, the tips turned bright red, innocent to an almost absurd degree, yet somehow blessed with the face of a total player. No, never have. I turned the steering wheel and took a corner, deciding not to tease him any further. Just as I parked outside the restaurant, my phone lit up with a call from Mom. Didn't Steven come back from his business trip? Why can't anyone reach him? His mother even called me asking. Damn. I had been too busy feeling sorry for myself and completely forgot that Steven's phone was broken. He lost his phone. I'm having lunch with him right now. We're getting a replacement SIM card this afternoon. I'll call you later. Afraid my lie would fall apart, I hung up immediately. Beside me, Isaac stared at me wide-eyed. Pretty girls really can lie without blinking. Why did that make me feel oddly guilty? After lunch, we happened to pass a phone store. I walked in, picked out a black phone, paid for it, and turned around only to nearly walk straight into Isaac. Is that for your boyfriend? His long lashes fluttered nervously as he looked at me. My ex-boyfriend. You treat your exes this well? I tossed the phone into the car and motioned for the visibly shocked boy to get in. Where are you headed? I'll give you a ride. You should deliver the phone first. I'm not in a hurry. Isaac leaned back in his seat, looking completely at ease. Your ex might be. His chin tilted slightly upward, handsome and effortlessly bold. I couldn't help laughing. We just broke up. As I spoke, I slammed my foot on the accelerator. The engine roared, and the car shot forward. Maybe young people really did enjoy thrills. Isaac grinned. Then that's great. You only realize someone better is waiting for you after you leave the wrong person. The next one? Was he talking about himself? I smiled but said nothing. When we arrived at the hospital and Isaac reached for the door handle, I leaned over and pressed down on his seatbelt. Stay put. I'll be right back. His lips curled downward in annoyance, every bit of his displeasure written plainly across his face, the complete opposite of Steven. Still, he obediently leaned back into his seat and lazily started scrolling through his phone. Carrying the new phone upstairs, I walked into Steven's room. He was sitting quietly on the hospital bed, flipping through a moderately thick book. The scene felt cool, peaceful, almost detached from the world. Hearing me enter, he looked up. His gaze settled on the phone box in my hands. Thank you. I didn't respond. Instead, I opened the drawer, pulled out his shattered phone, transferred the SIM card, powered everything up, and spent several minutes setting it up before finally handing it over. His long, pale fingers accepted it. His lips parted, and I could already tell he was about to thank me again. I cut him off. You've said thank you more today than you did in the entire last year. What happened? Losing your memory made you polite? For once, he looked genuinely surprised. Then his jade-like features softened into a sincere, gentle smile. The sight sent a sharp pain through my chest. Maybe all these years, I had been the one making things difficult for him, using love as a cage, trapping both of us in a situation neither of us could escape. Bitterness surged up so suddenly that I almost lost control. I quickly lowered my head. I'm leaving. The words barely left my mouth before I fled the room. The moment the door closed behind me, tears slipped down my cheeks. I steadied myself, wiped them away, and slowly exhaled as I headed downstairs. It's okay. When you've made a mistake, you can always fix it. But why was loving someone I could have had in the first place a mistake? A mistake so serious that fate itself had to correct it. So serious that something as absurd and melodramatic as amnesia had to happen to us. Only then did I realize I wasn't just exhausted enough to let go. I was resentful. Resentful of how unfair it all felt. Resentful that after finally obtaining the love I'd chased for so long, fate had chosen to take it away from me all over again. Chapter 3. By the time I got back to the car, I had completely calmed down. Isaac, however, tilted his head and stared at me. Were you crying? My heart skipped a beat. What are you talking about? I shot back instinctively. Where are you headed? I'll drop you off. I didn't dare look at him directly, but from the corner of my eye, I saw his expression fade. With his naturally cool features, he suddenly carried a hint of Steven's distant temperament. It only made me feel worse. I pressed down on the accelerator and drove out of the hospital parking lot. No need to take me all the way. Just drop me off when you get where you're going. Since he was being so considerate, I wasn't about to insist on playing chauffeur. I nodded and headed toward the office. For the next few days, I buried myself in work. I barely even went home. When the project was finally finished and I closed the last file, that familiar emptiness came crashing back. Before I could sink into it, my mother's phone call came through. Rebecca, Steven was in a car accident, and you thought you could keep something this serious from us? How did you find out? Am I not supposed to? If your father and I hadn't gone to the hospital for a checkup today, how long were you planning to hide it? Get over here right now. Both Steven's parents and mine knew we were together. I hadn't told them the truth because I was afraid that, under the pressure of his memory loss and everyone's expectations, Steven might force himself back into a relationship with me. That wasn't what I wanted. It would be unfair to him, and unfair to me. Breathing hard, I pushed open the hospital room door. Steven sat calmly on the bed, composed as ever, while our four parents surrounded him with concern and endless questions. Rebecca's here. Let Rebecca take care of Steven. My mother smiled politely at Steven's parents. No matter how many times I had been hurt by Steven in the past, I never let my parents see it. I was terrified they would think badly of him. The Steven they knew was always gentle, considerate, and caring toward me. Rebecca's been working all day. She must be exhausted. Steven's mother said warmly. It's not a serious injury anyway, and there are caregivers here. Let the young couple spend some time together. Then Rebecca should go home and rest. Once everyone had finally left, I walked over to Steven's bedside. Didn't you say all of this was just a lie I made up? Steven lifted his eyes slightly. His expression revealed nothing. I sat down and casually picked up an apple to peel. And what about you? I asked. Isn't that exactly what you wish it was? Silence filled the room. After a moment, I let out a quiet laugh and handed him the apple. Before I could say anything else, he spoke. If I agreed to be with you back then I don't have the right to use this as an excuse to back out. A strange calm settled over me. Would you really want that? I asked honestly. Without those 3 years of me chasing after you, without all the gratitude and sympathy you eventually felt, would you still be willing to settle for me? The question left my lips so effortlessly that it surprised even me. For the first time, I genuinely didn't care what the answer would be. Steven's eyes were dark. He had always been good at hiding his emotions, like a flawless jade sculpture. But this time, Something stirred beneath the surface. His voice carried unmistakable helplessness. Rebecca, I've only forgotten. That's all. That tiny bit of gentleness shattered me completely. The walls I'd spent days building around my heart collapsed in an instant. My voice caught as I finally told him the truth. You really don't love me. Now that everything had been reset to the beginning, I no longer had the courage to start all over again. I pulled out my phone, opened our chat history, and placed it in Steven's hands. He lowered his gaze and scrolled through the messages one by one. A long time passed before he looked up. His lips pressed into a thin line. For the first time, I caught traces of irritation and guilt in his expression. I'm sorry. No one should have to apologize for not being in love. I shook my head, wiping away my useless tears. I took back my phone and forced a smile. Get some rest. You seem fine physically. When you're discharged in a couple of days, I'll come pick you up. You don't have to feel so guilty. I didn't dare stay another second. Forcing myself to let go was already painful enough. I left the room without even allowing myself one final look at him. Chapter 4. The last time I drove while completely distracted. I ended up in an accident. The repairs alone had cost hundreds of thousands. This time, I drove with extreme caution, practically crawling down the road. While waiting at a red light, a WeChat notification popped up. Beautiful. What a coincidence. Curious. I opened it. Another message immediately followed. Look behind you. I turned around and saw Isaac's pale arm stretching lazily out of his car window, waving at me with an easy, unhurried motion. In a life tangled with exhaustion and complications, who still gets excited over a chance encounter? Most people lower their heads. Most people choose distance. Most people choose loneliness. But I couldn't deny it. At that moment, my mood lifted because of his simple "what a coincidence." A call came through. My friends and I are going to shoot some pool. Want to come? Isaac had asked me out countless times over the past few days, and I'd turned him down every single time. Young people really did seem to have endless enthusiasm. I checked the time. Only 9 o'clock. Still early. Going home would just mean sitting alone with my thoughts. Sure. Isaac overtook my car and pulled ahead. I followed behind him. When we entered the private room, I found several boys and girls around his age lounging on the sofas. For the first time, I felt the pressure of getting older. Damn, I was old. Holy crap. Isaac! A handsome guy in a blue t-shirt jumped to his feet. Where did you find a gorgeous woman like that? Got any more? He reached out to sling an arm around Isaac's shoulder. Isaac sidestepped neatly and wagged a finger. One of a kind. There was a hint of pride in his voice. A touch of smugness. It was oddly amusing. Later, as everyone took turns around the pool table, I leaned against the side with a drink in hand, watching Isaac line up his shots. His profile, the smooth lines of his back, the effortless confidence in his movements. A dangerous thought surfaced in my mind. It wasn't affection. It was escape, a desperate urge to release all the ugly emotions I'd been suppressing for days. I drained my glass in one swallow and forced the feeling down. How about a game? His eyes lit up instantly. 2 little canine teeth appeared when he smiled. He looked bright, spoiled, and unbearably young. I really hate losing. I chalked the cue stick casually. Then I'll let you win. The simple sentence immediately triggered a wave of laughter and teasing from everyone in the room. Steven had always loved pool. Years ago, just to spend more time with him, I'd hired professional coaches and practiced obsessively. At one point, I was practically training like a professional player. But Isaac was genuinely good. I made a small mistake midway through the game. Knowing how much he loved winning, I didn't fight to recover. I simply let the match unfold, and let him win. In the end, he stood beneath the overhead lights, cue stick resting in one hand, his long eyes tilted upward toward me. The smile on his lips was dazzlingly arrogant. Behind him, his friends cheered and applauded. The entire scene blurred into something that felt like a painting unfolding before my eyes. For a brief moment, something inside me ignited. The suffocating heaviness I'd carried since Steven's accident finally cracked open. Part of me wanted salvation. Another part wanted to drag someone else down with me. Isaac, I'm not a good person. I told you that already. So, Isaac set down his cue stick and walked over. Did you let me win? He stopped close enough that I could feel his presence. His voice was light. His eyes were full of laughter. It almost seemed like whether I had gone easy on him or not didn't matter. Seeing me there was enough to make him happy. And because I'd started thinking about him in ways I shouldn't, I looked up and smiled. If I did, is there a reward? Isaac froze. His eyes widened slightly. The movement softened the cold, untouchable aura he usually carried. What kind of reward do you want? His eyes were fascinating. When he looked down at people, he seemed distant enough to keep everyone away. But when they widened like this, all that cool detachment disappeared, leaving only a handsome young man who looked unexpectedly adorable. Adorable. That was the word. Something tugged at my heart. I crooked a finger at him. Obediently, he bent down and turned his ear toward me. Instead, I leaned forward and pressed a gentle kiss to his cheek. That reward is enough. Isaac jerked upright as if he'd been electrocuted. One hand flew to his cheek. He stared at me in shock. The tips of his ears turned crimson. You. The rest of the sentence never came out, but the shyness written all over his eyes made it obvious enough. I already knew what he wanted to say, and just as I was about to nod and tell him, I'll take responsibility for that, my phone rang. I turned around, picked up my bag from the sofa behind me, and pulled out my phone. The moment I saw the caller ID, every emotion inside me faded. Not abruptly, just enough to clear my head, like a splash of cool water. It wasn't cold, but it was sobering. Steven, I answered. You left your keys at the hospital. I searched through my purse. The garage key was gone. Luckily, I had a spare at home. Just keep them for now. I'll pick them up when I come get you after you're discharged. There was a brief pause on the other end. Even his breathing seemed to falter for a moment. Then he quietly replied, Okay. Chapter 5. It wasn't until after I hung up that I realized something. For the first time, even though I had a perfectly good reason to see Steven, I chose not to. I sat there in a daze until Isaac appeared behind me and rested a warm hand on my shoulder. He leaned in close, his breath brushing against my ear, warm yet fresh. Why are you so good to your ex? Buying him a phone, picking him up from the hospital. Are all beautiful women like that? The jealousy in his voice was unmistakable. I dodged the question with a tease. Yep, beautiful women are all like that. Do you like it? Isaac turned me around by the shoulders. His brows furrowed slightly. I've never even had an ex-girlfriend. Meanwhile, you're still hung up on your ex-boyfriend. He paused. Why would I like that? The directness left me speechless. Maybe my silence lasted too long. Isaac slowly removed his hands from my shoulders and looked away. He suddenly seemed awkward. You don't have to change if you don't want to. Despite the casual tone and arrogant expression, I heard the disappointment underneath. I'll change. And I meant it. Not for Isaac. For myself. I couldn't keep letting Steven occupy every corner of my heart and every conversation that left my lips. That night, I drank far too much with the group. Deliberately. Alcohol dulled the constant battle between reason and desire. It made it easier to stop thinking. Easier to bring Isaac home. His kisses landed against my neck. Warm and lingering, there was an intensity to him that was impossible to ignore. When I reached for the bed sheets, Steven's face suddenly flashed through my mind. A sharp pain twisted through my chest. Without hesitation, I pushed Isaac away. Desire still lingered in his eyes. He looked frustrated and hurt all at once as he knelt beside the bed. Did I hurt you? His voice was rough and restrained. Careful. Almost vulnerable. In that moment, he seemed just as pitiful as I was. Something inside me gave way. I lowered my eyes. No, maybe we should stop. We've both had too much to drink. I'm completely sober. The words came out firm, almost through gritted teeth. I looked up. The frustration, the desire, the determination in his eyes made my resolve waver. In the end, I lost the battle with myself. The rest of the night disappeared into a blur. By the time morning arrived, exhaustion had settled into every bone in my body. When I opened my eyes, Isaac was propping his head up with one arm, staring at me. Without thinking, I grabbed his t-shirt from nearby and tossed it at him. Put that on. His face immediately filled with dissatisfaction. It's dirty. So what? Are you planning to walk around half naked? Young people really were shameless. He raised an eyebrow and grinned. If you don't mind. Sure. I swallowed the curse that nearly escaped my mouth and turned away. Stay in bed. I'll go downstairs and buy you some clothes. At some point, he'd already moved closer, an arm wrapped around my waist, pulling me into his chest. His voice brushed against my ear. You're really thoughtful. The temperature in the room seemed to rise instantly. Realizing where this was heading, I quickly pushed him away. Get back in bed. Apparently, he hadn't expected me to snap at him. A stubborn lock of hair stuck up from the top of his head as he stared at me in surprise. The sight was unexpectedly adorable. I couldn't help laughing. Then I escaped to the bathroom before he could say anything else. After buying clothes and breakfast, I returned and tossed the shopping bag onto the bed. Breakfast's ready. Get dressed and come eat. Isaac stared at me. Just stared. What? I asked, confused. A slow smile appeared on his face. He leaned over and whispered something into my ear. My face instantly caught fire. Seriously, I couldn't deal with this man. Just wear what I bought and go home after breakfast. I snapped, mortified. Young people were impossible. After breakfast, I drove him home. When we arrived downstairs, I rested an arm on the window frame and waited for him to get out. He unbuckled his seatbelt, then didn't move. Instead, he just looked at me. Aren't you getting out? I asked. I still have to go to work. His expression darkened immediately. Without a word, he got out and slammed the door. I watched him stomp away, completely baffled. Before I could pull away, he suddenly turned around and strode back. The next second, he leaned through the window, grabbed my face, and kissed me. When he finally pulled back, breathing slightly unevenly, I understood what had upset him. Something inside my chest softened, warm and aching, just like the look in his eyes. Stop acting like you're dropping off a hookup after a one-night stand. The words came out fiercely. I couldn't help laughing. His imagination was incredible. Got it. Now go upstairs. But after I drove away and the city skyline rose around me once more, my grip tightened around the steering wheel. If he wasn't just a hookup, then what was he? My boyfriend? I brushed my lips thoughtfully. In the end, I chose not to define whatever existed between us. Chapter 6. When I arrived to pick Stephen up from the hospital, he was already dressed and sitting on the sofa, reading. His legs were crossed elegantly, sunlight spilling softly over him. If you didn't look into his eyes, you'd think he was an angel. Hearing me enter, Stephen looked up. For a moment, I almost imagined there was warmth in his gaze. I broke the illusion myself. Let's go. I'll take you home. Stephen stayed quiet throughout the drive. Only when we were almost at his house did he finally speak. Where have you been these past few days? What else? Busy with work. I turned a corner, answering absent-mindedly. For some reason, the atmosphere seemed to cool. Neither of us had been talking before, but the silence had felt comfortable. Now it felt strangely oppressive. I couldn't help glancing at him. Stephen was breathtakingly beautiful, as though carved by the hands of a master artist. But now, a faint crease had appeared between his brows, and his pale lips were pressed together. What's wrong? As always, I found myself helpless whenever he seemed unhappy. One eyebrow lifted slightly. The tension in his expression eased. Nothing. Then he added calmly, "You've done a lot for me lately. Let me take you to dinner tomorrow." Tomorrow? Isaac had been trying to see me for days. I'd canceled on him again and again because I didn't know how to face him, and he'd become increasingly annoyed because of it. I'd finally promised to have dinner with him tomorrow. The refusal stuck in my throat. I'd never been good at saying no to Stephen. Maybe I never learned how. Stephen looked at me steadily. You already have plans? The question somehow made things easier. I nodded softly. Yeah. For a brief moment, he seemed distracted. Then his expression grew distant again. Another time. Then, I watched his retreating figure and couldn't help smiling. Another time usually meant never. Some things really never changed. Even amnesia hadn't changed him. The next day, I arrived at the restaurant Isaac had chosen. The lighting was dim and intimate, the kind of place that practically looked designed for secret affairs. The moment I walked in, I spotted him. He was leaning lazily against his seat, looking down at his phone. The glow from the screen illuminated his face. making him appear especially cold and untouchable. Apparently, I'd always had a weakness for that type, the kind of beauty that seemed impossible to reach. When he saw me, he lifted his chin slightly. His eyes immediately brightened. Then his smile flattened. "You're impossible to get a date with." He paused. "The second you get what you want, you act like you don't know me." "I'm busy." The words left my mouth, and a bitter feeling followed immediately. How many times had Stephen brushed me off with that exact excuse? Before Isaac's mood could fully sour, I reached across the table and took his hand. I tried to sound as gentle as possible. "I'm sorry. No more disappearing, okay?" I squeezed his fingers lightly. "And if you really miss me, you can come find me at work." The smile instantly returned to his eyes. He lifted the corner of his mouth with exaggerated arrogance. "I'm busy too." "Fine," I smiled. "Then I'll wait until you're not." After parting ways with Isaac, I received a call from my childhood friend, Atlas. "Get over to my winery." His voice came through the speaker. "Stephen was hospitalized and you didn't tell me?" "What? Are we celebrating his discharge?" "We're celebrating your breakup." Atlas laughed quietly. The background was completely silent. He was obviously hiding somewhere to make the call. I turned the steering wheel and laughed. That's not exactly something worth celebrating. My friends had always been ruthless. More than once, they'd called me a simp for Stephen, the hopelessly devoted kind. Atlas hummed meaningfully. The tone made it clear he disagreed. He simply couldn't be bothered explaining why. To him, I'd escaped a sinking ship. That sounded like a victory. He lost his memory. I pressed down on the accelerator a little harder than necessary. The sudden force pushed me back against the seat. My heart jumped unexpectedly. He forgot the last 3 years. I stated the fact as calmly as possible. "What?" Atlas sounded genuinely shocked, surprised, and oddly anxious, as if he just realized something terrible was about to happen. Rolling my eyes at his dramatic reaction, I hung up and ignored him. Chapter 7. I had barely stepped into the winery when I heard people teasing Stephen, probably because he'd lost 3 years of memories and now seemed a little clueless. Please. Even if Stephen lost 10 years of memories, he'd still be more mature than everyone in this room combined. I honestly didn't know where they found the courage to make fun of him. There was an empty seat beside both Stephen and Atlas. Before I could decide where to sit, Atlas waved me over. "Rebecca, over here." The eager gossip-loving look on his face was already giving me a headache. I walked over and sat down. He immediately pushed a glass of wine toward me and lowered his voice. "Rebecca, I've watched you love Stephen all these years. Just give him some time." I almost laughed. A few hours ago, he'd been talking about celebrating my breakup. Now he was playing peacemaker? An inexplicable irritation rose in my chest. I frowned and took a long swallow of wine. "You just said you've watched me go through all this. Stephen's your friend." "Sure, but aren't I your friend too?" I set down the glass. "Why am I the one who has to keep waiting?" I kept my voice low despite my annoyance. I didn't want to make a scene. Atlas fell silent for a long time. Then he finally offered a weak excuse that was almost laughable. "Stephen likes you." Bullshit. That one slipped out louder than intended. Stephen looked over immediately. His gaze landed on me, calm, detached, completely unreadable. That was supposed to be love? Yeah, right. Besides, it didn't matter anymore. I'd impulsively let Isaac become part of this mess. Did I regret it? Of course I did. At least a little, but I still had enough sense of responsibility to deal with the consequences of my own choices. Since Stephen had only just been discharged from the hospital, he wasn't drinking. He was the designated driver. The rest of us handled the alcohol. By the end of the night, everyone unanimously decided that Stephen should take me home. Before leaving, I gave Atlas a long look. Seriously, there was something wrong with him. I leaned back in the passenger seat with my eyes closed while Stephen backed the car out of the parking lot. After a while, he asked, "Didn't you have plans today?" They ended early. Then Atlas called. So I came over. That was quick. His tone was flat. I responded without thinking. What? Should it have gone longer? There was no challenge in my voice, just a casual question. Apparently, Stephen interpreted it differently. His lips pressed into a thin line. "Rebecca, His voice was low, heavy. He said nothing beyond my name, but the displeasure underneath was unmistakable. The sound of my name on his lips snapped me back to reality. Only then did I realize how strange this all looked. Dinner with Isaac, then drinks with Steven and our friends. The seamless transition suddenly made me feel a little guilty. I licked my lips nervously. I need to tell you something. Steven didn't even glance at me. His cold response was permission enough to continue. Maybe because he seemed so indifferent, my confidence returned. I have a boyfriend now. After all, earlier tonight he'd openly told everyone we'd broken up. That had to mean he wanted a clean break between us. The more I thought about it, the easier the words became. The screech of brakes shattered the night. The car came to an abrupt stop. For the first time, Steven turned fully toward me. His face was icy. "What did you just say?" I froze. I'd never seen him look like this. Steven was always composed, always in control. He never let his emotions show. But right now, anger was written plainly across his face. My heart slammed against my ribs. For some reason, I suddenly felt guilty. I straightened instinctively, trying to sound confident. "Didn't we break up? And you lost your memory?" I swallowed. "Think about it. I spent 3 years chasing you before we got together." Another swallow. That means we're missing 3 years. 3 years of history. 3 years of feelings. 3 years that no longer existed for him. And honestly, even before the accident, being together had often felt like not being together at all. The gap between us had always been bigger than 3 years. Steven narrowed his eyes slightly. Then a smile appeared, sharp, mocking. His grip tightened around the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. Finally, he spoke. "Do whatever you want." Then he hit the accelerator. Hard. The car shot forward, way too fast. And the worst part? This was my car. The atmosphere inside turned unbearable. I couldn't understand it. His memories had reset to the point before we ever dated. So why was he reacting like this? Chapter 8. On the night of our graduation, I got completely drunk and showed up at Steven's door reeking of alcohol. He opened it and stood there with one hand resting against the doorframe. A slight frown appeared between his brows. My name left his lips, cool and clear as mountain spring water, instantly sobering me. Rebecca. He was about to leave the country for further studies. I was staying behind. For the first time in my life, I wouldn't be able to follow him wherever he went. If I didn't tell him that night, there would be countless variables in the future. I couldn't allow that. I stepped forward and wrapped my arms around his neck. Instinctively, he caught me by the waist. "Steven." My alcohol tolerance was actually pretty good, but pretending to be drunk made it easier to hide my embarrassment. I knew he would reject me. Still, loving someone meant trying even when you knew the odds were against you. That was the greatest confession I could offer him. Steven closed the door behind us and guided me to the sofa. Then he turned toward the kitchen. I immediately grabbed his wrist. "Don't go. I'm getting you some water." His voice was as cool as ever. Yet somehow, I heard a trace of gentleness beneath it. That tiny bit of kindness gave me more courage than it should have. "I like you, Steven." Silence filled the room. After a long moment, he gently removed my hand from his wrist. "You're drunk." A rejection, an escape route, gentle and cruel all at once. I forced my eyes open and looked directly at him, using every ounce of courage I possessed. I continued. "I'm not." I swallowed. "I've liked you ever since I learned what liking someone meant." Steven fell silent. His fingers curled slightly, his lashes lowered. I knew him too well. He was hesitating, struggling, annoyed. Maybe he pitied me. Maybe he simply couldn't bear to hurt me. Whatever the reason, I wanted one chance to love him openly instead of secretly. "Let me try." My voice trembled. "Let me pursue you, okay?" I hadn't wanted to cry, but by the time the plea left my lips, tears had already gathered on my lashes. Steven's dark eyes rested on me. For a long time. Finally, he let out a helpless sigh. "Okay." One word. That was all. But it was enough. Joy crashed over me like a tidal wave. I wanted to ask him again, just to make sure I hadn't imagined it. But he'd already turned toward the kitchen. I sat there drinking the warm water he brought me in tiny sips. Steven stood nearby. My heart was beating so fast that I was terrified he might hear it. "I'll take you home." His tone left no room for argument as he headed toward the door. I immediately followed. We walked side by side through the quiet night, under the warm glow of streetlights. By then, we'd both moved out of the dorms. Naturally, I'd bought an apartment in the same complex as his. For the first time, I regretted it. We lived too close. The walk was over far too quickly. "Good night." I stood outside my door, staring at him. The corners of Steven's long eyes curved ever so slightly. He dipped his chin in a faint nod. I watched his tall, slender figure disappear around the elevator corner before finally going inside. My heart was overflowing with all the hopes and dreams of a girl in love. That night, I didn't sleep at all. By the time I finally drifted off, dawn was already breaking. When I woke up again, the sun was high in the sky. The first day after my confession, I was ridiculously excited. I slipped into a fitted red dress, carefully applied my makeup, and called Steven. "Want to go out today?" "No." His answer came immediately. "I've already spoken with my advisor. I'm working on a project." I heard the sound of a glass being set down. Instantly, I could picture him. Silver-rimmed glasses, focused expression, calm concentration. The image softened my heart. "Then I'll buy some groceries and come over." I smiled. "I'll cook for you." There was a brief pause. He seemed about to refuse. Then, perhaps remembering what he'd agreed to the night before, he relented. "Okay." The change in his attitude didn't escape me. It filled me with renewed energy. In an excellent mood, I headed to the supermarket, buying vegetables, fruit, and fresh meat before making my way to his apartment. A few moments after I knocked, Steven opened the door. He was dressed in gray. The color softened his usual coldness, making him seem gentler somehow. Without a word, he took the grocery bags from my hands and carried them into the kitchen. I followed him inside. To my surprise, he was already washing vegetables with practiced ease. Watching his back, a ridiculous fantasy suddenly surfaced. It felt like we were married. The thought sent warmth flooding through me. "I'll do it." Without looking up, Steven placed the cleaned vegetables into a basket. "We'll do it together." Together was even better. It felt even more like marriage. Later, as we sat before a table filled with dishes we'd prepared side by side, I picked up my chopsticks. And in that moment, I was certain that no meal in the world could ever taste better than this one. Chapter 9. Steven stayed busy throughout the entire summer. I started taking on more responsibilities at the company, but I still made time to see him whenever I could. Sometimes I'd cook for him. Sometimes we'd take a walk together. Then he left for the United States. Only after an ocean separated us did I understand how terrifying distance could be. When someone doesn't love you, they don't have the energy to maintain a relationship through a screen. Again and again, I waited. Again and again, I hurt. Again and again, I tried to move on, yet the messages I received were always the same. "Sorry, I just saw this. Busy. The experiment just finished." To ease the constant feeling that I was slowly losing him, I kept flying back and forth between China and the United States. Over those 3 years, I bought a total of 172 round-trip tickets. The day Steven graduated, I arrived carrying a bouquet of flowers. From a distance, I watched him standing beneath the sunlight, watched the way the golden light wrapped around him, making him seem almost divine. And suddenly, I felt at peace. Loving someone didn't necessarily mean possessing them. Maybe the best ending for my humble, one-sided love was to let it remain frozen at its most beautiful moment. "Steven, congratulations on graduating." I walked over and shoved the bouquet into his arms. The corners of his lips lifted slightly. The smile was unusually gentle. His gaze was so captivating that it made me want to try one more time. Just once. "It's been 3 years. I forced myself to sound cheerful, disguising the panic in my heart. "So, do you want to be with me?" This is the last time I'll ask. What happened next completely caught me off guard. Steven's eyes curved slightly. "Okay." For a moment, confusion overwhelmed even my happiness. I didn't know what to do with my hands. I could only grip the hem of my shirt tightly. Steven's gaze lowered. Then he freed one hand from the bouquet and reached for mine. Our fingers intertwined. Still nervous? The rare teasing tone instantly relaxed me. A second later, the meaning of his answer finally sank in. Joy flooded through me. I wrapped my arms around his neck and pressed a quick, light kiss to his lips. Stephen's eyes darkened immediately, and for perhaps the first time in my life, I saw the tips of his ears turn red. Unfortunately, even fate seemed to think this love had been forced into existence, so it erased everything and returned us to the beginning. Chapter 10. We're here. Stephen's cold voice broke through my thoughts. He was obviously still in a terrible mood. Pulled back from my memories, I nodded absent-mindedly, unfastened my seatbelt, and stepped out of the car. One foot had barely touched the ground when I heard his restrained voice behind me. Rebecca. I turned around. He looked at me, but no words followed. His brows were furrowed as if he didn't know what he wanted to say. All that remained was endless frustration. So even 3 years ago, I had already been little more than a burden to Stephen, something neither desirable nor easy to let go of. A tasteless obligation, leaning against the butterfly door of my McLaren. I laughed softly. Stephen, even fate thinks we're wrong for each other. I looked at him. It gave us another chance. A chance to start over and make different choices. My smile faded slightly. So what are you still hesitating about? Look forward. Don't look back. Don't make this harder for me. Yes. The moment I realized what I had meant to Stephen 3 years ago, I was hurt. I was Rebecca. I always tried to do everything perfectly. So how had I spent so many years turning myself into someone's second choice? Something they settled for when nothing better came along. How pathetic was that? The hangover was brutal. I couldn't drag myself out of bed. Just as I was deciding to skip work, my phone rang. Beautiful. I just woke up and already miss you. Isaac's voice was soft and sleepy, almost boyish. I smiled without even opening my eyes. Then come over and bring me breakfast. His tone instantly brightened. The sweetness in his voice was so obvious that it lifted my mood immediately. For the first time in a long while, everything felt light. I forced myself out of bed, took a bath, did my skincare routine, and had just finished applying body oil when the doorbell rang. Opening the door, I found Isaac standing there with enough breakfast for an entire family. I took the bags from him. How am I supposed to eat all this? Try a bite of everything. You're ridiculous. Rich kids really are something else. Suddenly, a pair of strong arms wrapped around my waist. Before I could react, Isaac pulled me against him. His lips brushed near my ear as he whispered teasingly. You called me a rich kid. Doesn't that mean you should spoil me a little? Get lost. The words had barely left my mouth before he turned my face toward him and kissed me. By the time breakfast finally happened, it was considerably later than either of us had planned. Young people really did have endless energy. Ever since clearing things up with Stephen, something inside me had become lighter. I stopped running from Isaac, stopped hesitating. Instead, I began enjoying his enthusiasm and returning it, until one afternoon, while walking hand in hand with him after leaving a Chanel boutique, we ran into Stephen. The moment I saw him, I instinctively pulled my hand away from Isaac's. Instantly, without thinking, I didn't understand why. I didn't dare look at Isaac's expression. I didn't dare look at Stephen's either. A tightness squeezed around my heart. Guilt. Fear. But fear of what? Fear of whom? Stephen walked over. His gaze settled on me briefly. Calm. Unreadable. His eyes were dark, concealing every emotion. Yet somehow, I felt ashamed. Pathetic. After he walked away, I realized Isaac had already put some distance between us. He leaned lazily against a railing. His expression was cold. Beneath that coldness simmered unmistakable anger. He was waiting for an explanation. I had none to give. I rubbed the bridge of my nose. I just reacted without thinking. The excuse sounded weak even to me, but it was true. There had been no calculation, no intention, no conscious choice at all. Isaac pressed his tongue against the inside of his cheek and cut me off. Your ex? He didn't seem to need confirmation. A bitter smile appeared on his face. You can't let him go. His laugh carried nothing but mockery. So why did you drag me into this? The anger in his voice was impossible to miss. Then he turned and walked away. Fast. as if he were trying to escape. Watching his retreating figure, my chest ached. It wasn't that I couldn't let Stephen go. I was letting him go. I was trying to forget him. Chapter 11. After that day, Isaac didn't contact me for an entire week. I opened our chat window countless times. Not once did I send a message. It seemed that after Stephen, I always held something back from everyone else. I felt exhausted, curled up on the couch. I drank straight from a bottle of wine, too lazy to even get a glass. Then the doorbell rang. I staggered over and opened the door. It was Isaac. He'd lost weight. He looked tired. And somehow, he looked even better because of it. His lashes were lowered, and there was a fragile quality about him that made people want to either spoil him endlessly or completely ruin him. "You couldn't even humor me a little?" he asked. One message would have been enough. He sounded heartbreakingly aggrieved. His voice had softened into a pitiful little whine. Without hesitation, I threw myself into his arms and wrapped my arms around his waist. "Isaac." I held him tighter. "From now on, every time I make you unhappy, I'll make it up to you, okay?" He lowered his head. "Why can't you just stop making me unhappy in the first place?" Each word came out heavier than the last. More wounded, more vulnerable. Yet the arm around my waist remained careful and controlled, as if he was afraid of hurting me. The answer was simple. I could. In that moment, his unwavering choice of me healed wounds I'd carried for years. The insecurity, the constant self-doubt, the habit of shrinking myself to earn someone's love. All of it. That night, Isaac was both more passionate and more restrained than usual. Later, under the warm glow of the bedside lamp, I cupped his face and looked into his eyes. Those beautiful eyes I had always admired were soft and full of emotion. I leaned forward and kissed his eyelashes. "I like you." For a brief second, he froze. Then joy overwhelmed him completely. Isaac practically moved into my apartment for several days. One evening, while applying body oil after a shower, I casually suggested, "Why don't you just go home, pack your things, and move in here?" "What did you just say?" His voice was so quiet it almost didn't sound real. Through the mirror, I watched him standing behind me. His eyes widened slightly. He looked unexpectedly vulnerable. "If you don't want to, forget it." I couldn't help teasing him. "Yes." The answer came instantly. The tips of his ears turned red. My heart felt impossibly full. Everything seemed to be moving in the right direction. Then Stephen sent me a message. "Come downstairs. I'm in your company's parking lot." For no reason at all, my heart skipped a beat. It wasn't a good feeling. I opened the passenger door and got into his car. His profile looked cold and unreadable. "What happened?" Stephen's long lashes trembled slightly. Then he turned toward me. His eyes were impossibly dark. I remember everything. For a moment, I couldn't process what he'd said. Honestly, I'd never expected him to forget forever, so I accepted the news surprisingly quickly. I nodded. "That's good." Stephen narrowed his eyes. His voice became so cold that it almost felt condescending. "Rebecca, I never intended to break up with you." A surge of resentment rose unexpectedly inside me. My own tone cooled. "Then let's just say I wanted to break up with you." For the first time in my life, I stood my ground in front of Stephen. Ironically, it made me nervous enough for my heart to race. To cover it up, I added, "Besides, things are going pretty well with him." I forced a smile. "Maybe I'll introduce you to someday." Stephen's face darkened immediately. Without warning, he reached over and gripped my chin. I'd always known what was buried beneath his polished exterior. Pride, detachment, ruthlessness. His upbringing simply hid those traits beneath perfect manners and restraint. Love was seeing exactly who he was and rushing toward him anyway. Falling out of love was feeling offended the moment he stopped pretending. People were unfair like that. Before I could react, Stephen released me. The flash of emotion disappeared. His composure returned. "You don't have to try to make me jealous." His gaze locked onto mine. "I like you." For years, he'd never once said those words. Not once. And now he said them so easily. It left me momentarily stunned. "But I don't love you anymore." I lowered my eyes. My voice was gentle, and a little lost. "I'm not trying to hurt you. I've just figured things out. I was responding not only to Steven, but to the person who had defined my entire youth. After loving him for so long, I'd finally remembered to love myself. And only after meeting Isaac did I understand that love is supposed to be mutual. That two people choosing each other is what gives it meaning. Chapter 12. Get out. Steven's face was pale. His lips were pale too. He looked like he was barely holding himself together, forcing himself to remain calm as he spoke. Hearing that, I lowered my head and unfastened my seatbelt. I didn't want to argue about how cold and harsh his tone sounded. It was over. That was all that mattered. But just as I opened the car door and stepped out with one foot, a powerful force yanked me back. Rebecca. I was pulled into the seat again. Steven's voice was low and strained. How can you just walk away? His grip tightened around my wrist. You were the one who liked me. You were the one who pursued me. You were the one who brought me into this. His eyes locked onto mine. They were slightly red, painfully red. And now you're the one who doesn't want me anymore? For a moment, I was stunned. Steven had never looked like this before. His expression was tightly controlled, as if he were suppressing something he couldn't allow himself to feel. Maybe it was because he was too beautiful. Maybe it was because I'd spent so many years loving him. But for the first time, he looked vulnerable, almost hurt. The sight made my chest ache. I'm sorry. I don't want your apology. His fingers tightened further around my wrist. Pain shot through my arm. I lowered my gaze. His hand was long and elegant, pale. The knuckles had turned white from the force of his grip. It hurt. And for some reason, I suddenly thought of Isaac. If it had been Isaac, he probably would have noticed immediately. He would have let go. He would have apologized. That was the difference. That was the answer. Gently but firmly, I pried Steven's fingers away from my wrist. Then I rubbed the reddened skin. By now, my emotions had completely settled. The thing I'm apologizing for. I looked at him quietly. Is spending all these years tangled up in something that should have ended long ago. A small smile touched my lips. For disturbing your life. I shook my head. But I'm not apologizing for leaving. Not now. Not ever. I opened the car door again and stepped out. My pace was steady, confident. I never looked back. I wasn't regretful. I wasn't heartbroken. And I definitely wasn't second-guessing my decision. Yet somehow, tears still slid down my face. I didn't wipe them away, because I was afraid Steven would see. And if he did, he might mistake them for proof that I still couldn't let him go. Chapter 13. I thought I had made myself clear that day. What I didn't expect was to see Steven downstairs when I went to pick up a package. He was sitting on the hood of his car. The car was black. He was dressed in black. The streetlights didn't even reach him. And yet, somehow, I recognized him instantly. Maybe when you've loved someone for that long, even after you've let them go, you still possess the ability to find them in a crowd with a single glance. My grip tightened around the package. After a moment, I walked over and stopped in front of him. What are you doing here? Why don't you love me anymore? Steven didn't look up. He simply asked the question in a low voice, sounding genuinely confused. Before I could answer, his gaze lifted and settled on me. Then it stopped at my neck. For the first time, color appeared on Steven's usually cold face. Crimson, desperate, heartbreakingly beautiful. His cool fingers brushed against the faint marks on my neck. His voice was so hoarse it barely sounded like his own. Rebecca. His hand trembled slightly. Tell me nothing happened between you two. I looked at him. To my surprise, I felt neither satisfaction nor sympathy. Only calm. Steven. My voice was steady. We broke up. We broke up a long time ago. The words seemed to ignite something inside him. The flawless face I'd always compared to a jade sculpture suddenly became vivid with emotion. Beautiful. Sharp. Almost cruel. No. He spoke each word separately, slowly, refusing to accept it. Suddenly, I remembered someone. Eva. The girl Steven had once liked. Even now, I couldn't forget her name. Everyone had seen how gentle he was with her. Fortunately, or unfortunately, Eva never settled down. They never actually got together. Back then, when she started liking someone else, a shamefully selfish part of me had been happy. I'd celebrated it in secret. Looking back now, The jealousy that had distorted my thoughts probably looked very much like Steven's expression at this moment. A dull ache spread through my chest. I felt sorry for him, and for myself. But I'd finally learned to see things clearly. Steven never loved me enough. There was one thing I'd never admitted to anyone, not even myself. I had spent years comparing how he treated me to how he had once treated Eva, and every single time, I lost. Steven. Saying it aloud turned out to be easier than I'd imagined. You're not in love with me. I took a breath. You're just unwilling to accept that after loving you for so many years. I finally walked away. His jaw tightened. I continued quietly. Love doesn't look like this. Neither does affection. Do you still remember Eva? I was jealous of her. The words rose to my lips but never escaped. Rebecca. His voice cracked. Don't tell me what I feel. Moisture clung to his long eyelashes. He paused, then whispered. I turned loving you into a habit. A habit. The words pierced straight through my chest. Like a thorn. Silent. Invisible. Painful. I turned to leave. I didn't want to keep discussing something that only hurt me. My life was finally moving in a direction that made me happy. I didn't want to look back anymore. But before I could take a step, Steven wrapped an arm around my waist from behind, tightly, desperately, as though he was afraid I would disappear. His chin rested on my shoulder. His embrace trembled. Can we start over? His voice was barely more than a whisper. Please. I reached for his wrist, intending to pull him away. Then I saw someone emerge from the building, a tall figure. He must have wondered why I hadn't come back upstairs yet. Isaac. For a brief second, he froze. I couldn't even make out his expression. Then he turned around and walked away, fast. So fast it looked like he was running, escaping. Not once did he stop. Not once did he come over to demand an explanation. Not once did he ask a single question. The realization hurt more than anything else. He was so afraid of hearing the answer that he couldn't even bring himself to ask. My eyes filled with tears. I turned back to Steven. Do you remember? My voice shook. When I asked for your permission to pursue you? He stared at me silently. I swallowed hard. Then respect me now. I said no. I pulled his hand away from my waist. Can you let me go? My voice softened. Can you stop interrupting my life? The strength left his arm instantly. After removing his hand completely, I glanced at him one last time. His eyes, once dark and brilliant, had gone hollow. His face was pale, his lips even paler. I'd always thought he resembled a perfect jade sculpture. Now he truly did. Exquisite, flawless, and utterly lifeless. I didn't stay. I turned and ran in the direction Isaac had disappeared. He looked so hurt. He was probably hiding somewhere alone. Maybe even crying. Winter had stripped the world bare. The snow hadn't even arrived yet, and the cold already cut through everything. But as I ran toward Isaac, my heart was warm, burning hot. Chapter 14. I thought it would take me a long time to find Isaac. But even when a puppy throws a tantrum and runs away from home, it never dares wander too far. Maybe it's afraid of getting lost. Or maybe it's afraid of missing the person who comes looking for it. I found him sitting outside a convenience store, his eyes red. A pack of beer rested beside his feet. Looking so heartbroken and miserable, he had attracted the attention of several girls nearby who kept stealing glances at him. I walked over, crouched down, and took the beer from his hand, looking into his watery eyes. I spoke gently. Let's go home, okay? Is there still room for me there? Isaac reached for the beer. Fortunately, I held on tightly, failing to take it back. He looked up at me with a resentful expression. His eyes were wet. His face was full of grievance. I took a sip from the beer and grabbed his chin. Then I kissed him. When I pulled away, I smiled. How about I feed it to you like that when we get home? I pointed at the unopened beers on the ground. We can finish all of them. Isaac followed my gaze. The tips of his ears immediately turned red. Still trying to act upset, he muttered in a sulky voice. I wouldn't exactly object. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed the shocked expressions of the girls standing behind him. Several of them had covered their mouths in disbelief. Laughing, I stood up and offered him my hand. Isaac ignored it. Instead, He climbed to his feet on his own and started walking ahead with exaggerated arrogance, carrying the beer behind him. I couldn't stop smiling. "Hey, Your Highness." He didn't look back. I continued anyway. I didn't agree to let my ex pursue me again. I quickened my pace. "Honestly, I still prefer younger men." Isaac stopped instantly, turning around. He stared at me. His face darkened. "What if I get old?" I blinked. That train of thought was truly unique. Jogging over, I stuffed the beer into his hands and rose onto my toes. A quick kiss landed on his lips. Then I'll only like the young man named Isaac. When we reached the entrance of the building, Stephen was still there. The person beside me immediately became unhappy again. His eyes were still slightly red, but now there was something playful and mischievous hidden beneath them. "I want to kiss you." His gaze locked onto mine. "Right now." I didn't hesitate. My arms wrapped around his neck. Snow had started falling. The first snow of winter. Kissing the person you loved beneath the season's first snowfall. There probably wasn't anything more romantic than that. Later, Isaac led me upstairs. The apartment felt warm and safe. By the end of the night, all I could think was that age had nothing to do with knowing how to care for someone. When you truly loved a person, treating them well became instinctive, something written into your very nature. There was no such thing as turning love into a habit. That wasn't love. At some point, the moonlight outside became too bright. I climbed out of bed and walked over to close the curtains. Then I froze. Down below, a lone figure stood in the snow. A thin layer of white had already settled over his shoulders. My grip tightened on the curtain. "Isaac." My voice was quiet. "Use my phone and send him a message." I swallowed. "Tell him to leave." I knew Isaac wasn't happy. The moment I walked over to the window, he must have felt it. But I couldn't just watch someone I'd loved for so many years collapse from the cold during the first snowfall. It wouldn't change my mind. It would only hurt him and ruin his health. It was better for Isaac to send the message. It would reassure him and hopefully convince Stephen to let go. "Okay." Isaac's voice carried unmistakable amusement and just a tiny bit of satisfaction. When I finally saw Stephen get back into his car, I relaxed and closed the curtains. The next second, Isaac pulled me into his arms, pinching my cheek. He glared at me. "You didn't even delete your chat history with him." His outrage was almost adorable, and I saw all of it. I covered those beautiful eyes with my hand. The jealousy and irritation spilling out of them was almost impossible to face directly. "I'll love you like this too someday." I smiled softly. More and more. Unexpectedly, Isaac froze. Then he lowered his head and buried his face against my neck. His voice came out muffled, soft, stubborn, a little aggrieved. "You don't have to." He paused. "I'd rather you just keep loving me." I laughed quietly. "Okay." Much later, when I finally started deleting everything related to Stephen, or perhaps everything related to the sad, desperate version of myself from the past, I saw the message Isaac had sent. "I'm tired. You really don't know how to care about people. Did you expect her to drive you to the hospital in the middle of the night too?" A little later, after reading more of our old conversations, he'd added another message. "I'll treat her well, better than she ever treated you." I deleted everything else, but I kept that final message, because I was grateful that someone in this world understood my fears, my compromises, my years of loving someone who never loved me the same way. And that person just happened to be Isaac. Chapter 15, Sweet Bonus. While looking for something, I unexpectedly dug up an old diary. The moment I realized what I must have written in it back then, my heart sank. I tossed it into a storage box beside me. The sound wasn't quiet. It startled Isaac, who had been curled up on the sofa. He walked over, crouched in front of me, and looked at me with bright eyes. "Why do you look unhappy?" A moment ago, I had only been annoyed. Now I was terrified that he might read my diary. Apparently, the guilt was written all over my face. Isaac's captivating eyes narrowed slightly. There was something oddly fierce about his expression, cute and intimidating at the same time. It gave me a strange mix of excitement and nervousness. His long fingers slipped into the storage box and rested on the diary. His voice was gentle, yet oddly dangerous. "Can I read it? Could I really say no? Just don't get mad after you read it." How could I ever be mad at Rebecca? Isaac smiled mysteriously before lowering his gaze to the diary and quietly flipping through the pages. I stared at the sharp line of his jaw. Soon, I noticed his lips pressed into a thin line, and his expression had become extremely unpleasant. Realizing disaster was approaching, I scrambled up and reached for the diary. Isaac leaned back just enough to avoid me, then wrapped an arm around my waist and pulled me onto his lap, making me enjoy the reading session with him. The weather is cold. Steven and Eva's names cover the classroom windows. Everyone keeps teasing them, and I have to force a smile. Jealousy is surprisingly easy to understand. Eva failed advanced mathematics and cried at her desk. Steven offered to tutor her. Looking at my own grade report, I suddenly wasn't so happy anymore. Eva started dating Jishin from the mathematics department. Steven has seemed distant these past few days, but he doesn't look that heartbroken. Maybe he never liked her that much. I feel awful for saying this, but I'm secretly happy. I suddenly covered the page with my hand. I don't want you to read anymore. With a snap, Isaac closed the diary and tossed it aside. Then he cupped my face and pressed his lips against mine. I'm not jealous at all. He paused. I'm secretly happy. For some reason. Those words made my heart feel both warm and aching. Of course, Isaac soon proved through actions rather than words that he was, in fact, very jealous. By the time night fell, he pulled me to my feet. Come with me. I want to show you something. I was exhausted. With my head hanging low, I complained about how annoying he was, but I still bundled myself up and let him lead me out. When he finally parked in front of N University, I froze. How do you know this is where I went to college? Isaac played with my fingers. This was my university too. Our school didn't allow outsiders onto campus. I had no idea what he said to the security guard at the gate. He even pointed at me while explaining something. Eventually, the guard let us in. Hand in hand, we walked through the snow-covered campus of my memories. My heart swelled with emotions I couldn't quite describe. Eventually, he led me to the classroom where I used to study during my freshman year. Isaac climbed through the window, unlocked the door from the inside, and let me in. Then I saw him standing by the window overlooking the sports field. Quietly, he traced 2 names onto the fogged glass. Isaac, Rebecca. My eyes instantly turned red. The cold white classroom lights illuminated his tall, slender figure from behind. How could someone step so perfectly into your life and heal every wound your younger self had ever carried? Before I realized it, I had already walked over. Standing at the next window, I wrote our names too. As more names appeared across the misty glass, it gradually became filled with countless repetitions of Isaac, Rebecca. At last, the old memory of Steven Eva was completely erased. Rebecca, there was a period when your university was under lockdown, Isaac said softly, bending closer until our noses nearly touched. You tried climbing over the wall and got stuck on top of it. I was the one who helped you down. I stared at him in surprise. I remember thinking then, this girl is way too adorable. His eyes darkened with what seemed like endless regret. I wrapped my arms around his neck. Then why didn't you recognize me when we met again? Isaac lowered his gaze. I didn't dare believe it was you, and I wasn't sure. Slowly, the fog blurred the names on the glass once more, but this time, there were no classmates teasing us, which meant I could finally kiss my boy properly and without interruption.